Tools I used: GoPro cameras to record the video, hit film, straight up, not pro, hit film to edit the video. To look at the video, I'm using a tool that is called MPC-BE. It's a video player that lets you go both forward and back by frames, as well as just regular moving forward or backward. To mark things up, I'm using Epic Pen, and that gets us to looking at the actual videos. So let me switch over to the video itself. Here are the two streams. They are pretty closely coordinated. They're within a frame or so of synchronization. So when I'm looking at this, for Florentine, I generally don't watch at full speed because there's 4 different swords, 4 hands to watch. There's a lot happening in Florentine, so I will often watch Florentine at about 80% speed. Sword and Board, a lot of times I will watch at full speed, but it can be very helpful to watch things at a slower speed so you can see more of what's going on. So the two views I have here are at 90 degrees difference, so we don't get opposite sides, we get basically a front and side view of the fighting. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm in the red, Ender is in the blue, and we will look at the first fight. So let me actually turn the speed down. Oops, 80%, there we go. I'm going to hit play. We've got some Florentine fighting. All right, so in this fight, Glenn wins the fight, which after having watched myself fight is surprising to me because there's so much going wrong here. So let's work our way through it. So let's start by looking at feet. Right? So if you look at stance, right, going back here to the beginning here, first thing we can look at if we look at this is how wide the stance is, right? A good stance is about shoulder and a half, 2 times shoulder width. This is pretty wide. Right? So stance is probably too wide. Also, if you look at the top video, you can see that Glenn's right foot is pointing this way, which means Glenn is fighting a guy right here. And you may notice there is nobody over here. I just threw a stickman in so Glenn doesn't feel so bad about who he's fighting. Right? Glenn's foot is not pointing at his opponent, it's pointing at the person next to his opponent. Now, because I'm Glenn, I can tell you why I was doing this. It's still wrong, but here's what I was doing incorrectly. And that is, I was trying to shift my guard focus from the center of Ender to his right hand, because I know Ender's right-handed, so I want his primary attack to be facing the middle of my defense, right? I want his left to be coming around to my outside, so I can force his left hand to the outside, because that's going to be his weaker hand. However, I should have done that by shifting my step, and instead I rotated my foot. When you rotate your right foot like that, you can see, well, maybe you can't see, but this hip here comes around a little bit, and that does change the focus line of my body. So my body actually is focused right here on Ender, right, on X in the top screen. But I did that by rotating my foot instead of rotating my torso, and that was wrong. And that's something we will see continually made as a mistake. My only defense in doing that is that I am very dumb. So that is our first step. If you guys have questions about things I say or other comments, feel free to, again, drop them in the chat. But I'm going to hit erase on this, and we can watch me do some more stuff wrong. So when we begin, guard close, or the stance closes up. Right? If we go back a couple frames here to here, I did fix my feet. Right? My feet are now at a much better width. There's a bend in the knees. If you look at my feet, you can see that I've got knee over laces, which is a good place to be. There's a bend in the knee. You can't see it on the bottom, but you can see at the top there's a bend in the knee here. I am on the ball of my foot here. Not as excited by that. I'd rather have my foot flat, but we're not quite there. But that's not catastrophic. That's not too bad. Then what's going to happen next is I'm going to close pretty aggressively. So you can see that we're pretty far apart. We are still in engagement range. Ender is still threatened by the fact that I can take one big step and attack him. And he has opened up his guard. I'm not going to talk too much about what Ender's doing over there. But we can see Glenn's guard. Another thing to look at, since we're making fun of Glenn over here, not making fun, we are giving valuable and useful critiques to Glenn, is Glenn's hand, this one right here, is really low, right? His overall guard, other than the low hands, isn't bad, right? We have the left hand here, right, going to the top, is guarding the outside lane, and then the right hand has moved over to guard the center lane. That's some good basic Florentine stuff. If I'm fighting Florentine, or if you're fighting Florentine, if someone is fighting Florentine, you want to guard that center lane, because that's how you get stabbed. Right? Or worse, they get their swords in the center lane, and they can just also just hit you in the body. So you don't want to give up that center lane. However, having your hand that low does open up this whole pocket for a stab. Right? If I close with my hand that low, I have to bring my hand up to block, and that has a couple problems. One, I'm bringing it up to block, and I'd be pushing that shot up into my face. And two, it's just harder to clear, because I have to clear up, out, and around in this kind of loop that goes in towards my torso and then comes back out to the outside lane as my hand comes up. And that is, in other words, is going to arc around kind of like this as I bring my hand in and around to pull out that stab. And that's just not great. So this is going to open me up probably to stabs later on in life, which, as a Florentiner, we all hate getting stabbed. So that's also going to kind of be bad. So we're 4 seconds in, and it's already kind of a mess. Now, normally I won't be this critical, but we're talking about me, and I'm perfectly okay making jokes at my own expense. I do encourage you, when you're dealing with reviewing other fighters, and I do this when I'm reviewing fighters who are not myself, it's important to point out what they're doing right as well. If you just dump a lot of negativity on somebody, they're going to feel kind of bummed out. They're going to feel attacked. A lot of times they'll be defensive. And we want this to be a positive learning experience. But I'm okay with this because I'm talking about me, and this is my type of humor, so I'm not offended by me saying these things about myself. So let's move forward. I'm going to use the frame-by-frame feature here. So let me, whoops, that was not the frame-by-frame feature. Bad work, Glenn. There we go. So if we go forward, Glenn gets in guard, guard's too wide, he fixes his stance, his hands are too low, one good step. Now, again, foot problem, right? When I come in, there's an attack, and then there's that. You'll notice what just happened. Let's back up frame by frame. I'm here, I've landed, right? I've landed, I've come in, I've absorbed that impact, and a couple bad things have happened. So again, things to look at. Guard, footwork. That's what we're just looking at right now in this fight. My guard has dropped. This hand went down, which is bad because my body is up here. Now, it's not catastrophic because Ender's moving back, so he's unlikely to be able to attack me, but my hands are now way too low. Also, as you're about to see, when we continue moving through this, there's going to be a cross step there. And you notice that cross step. That was the back leg going across to the right. And it's the leg that's on the left side. It's my left leg going behind and over to the right. Look at that foot placement. That is exactly wrong. The foot that should have moved is this one, right? This foot is the one that should have moved over. So if you look down at the bottom, this foot should have moved to here, and my back foot should have stayed here. That would have opened my stance, but allowed me to change my position. If you were Ender in this position, this is exactly when you attack very aggressively. You would take a step, and you would move here, right, to the other side of me, right? So that would put you, on the bottom, right about there. And I have very little ability to do anything like that. It's going to be hard for me to rotate that way because my hips are pointing over here, right? My hips are pointing wildly to my left because my feet are crossed. It's going to be very hard for me to rotate further to my right to deal with anything attacking over there. My feet are crossed, so I have no good way to unentangle myself. This is terrible footwork. This is a bad step, a bad choice. It's very lazy on my part in my movement, and it would open me up to an attack if Ender wasn't dealing with the fact it was 103 degrees in Texas that day. So that is another mistake we want to look at. So what we're getting now is, or what I'd be doing when I'm building up my notes, and I do have notes on this, my notes are pay more attention to footwork, my forward foot, and look at how I'm moving my feet, and my guard's too low. And these are preliminary notes. I've watched the whole video several times, so I know that these are going to be continuing themes, but you want to pull out themes. If someone makes one mistake once, if this was the only time I crossed my feet, not necessarily something that becomes useful feedback. One time you made a mistake, your footwork. If there's nothing else I'm doing wrong, highly unlikely, but if that was the case, then yes, you can bring that up. But if it only happens once, and out of the other 25 fights, this footwork is good, then that's not going to be useful feedback. You want to look for things that are persistent. So we are going to note these things and then see if they continue to be problems. So continuing on with the fight, some terrible cross-stepping, and now hands are low, comes in, attack with the left. If we go back, we can see, if we move forward, if we watch Glenn's right hand, right, when he comes in, he does come in with a guard to block, but his guard opens up. If we look, we can see, look how much he's goalposted, right? There is all of this space open. He has given up the center lane. I was too early in widening my guard. It's okay to widen your guard as you close, too early. So, another thing to think about. So, what's happening with your hands as you close? The step is good. There's a good, strong step. One thing that has been consistently well done in these fights is we'll see strong closing steps. Not kind of a casual step, but a good, solid lunge that lands in a good recovery position. So, continuing on, there's the fight. Glenn gets hit in with the left. Point for Glenn. Good work, Glenn. Next fight. Now just watch a couple of these come through, and those things we talked about, let's see if they keep up. So it's fight 2, fight 3. Looking at the feet, noticing that that front foot is again always pointing off to the side. Right? Hands are low. Gonna get stabbed at some point. Good things that are getting done. We are covering that center lane pretty well, especially as my default guard. My closing guard, still pretty good as far as current center lane. Hands too low. So let's take a look here at fight 5 here. So fight 5, we have a good initial close. If you're going to close and you want to do it, close strongly. Don't make a gentle close. Make a strong close. And we've got that. We've got a good push off from the starting position. So we're here, and then we have, moving forward one frame at a time, a strong close. However, you may notice there was a huge tell. The hands came down, gathered myself in, and then lunged forward. Should have kept the hands up and then lunged forward. Center lane is well covered. So we have got, whoops, my pen. We have got this hand in the center lane. Good work there. The left hand, if we go back a frame or two, watch the left hand in the top view. You can see that it comes in. It is close to the right hand. And you'll notice that as I come in, I have got this angle here, which is closing off that center lane and encouraging Ender to throw to the outside. And as you notice, down here in the bottom, we get exactly that. We get a shot thrown to the outside as I close. That is good control of the fight. When I'm closing, I'm not just closing and saying, oh, let me just close without thought. I'm closing in a way that's drawing an attack, right? There's a movement to the inside with the left hand, which then draws that attack and allows me to clear to the outside. And then, as we follow along, there's an aborted strike with the right hand. We come in, we start to throw a shot, we realize that's not going to work, and then, oh, actually it looks like there's a little bit of chambering, something else to look at, right? When the shot goes to be thrown, comes in, there's the block, And then, we can see this more in the bottom view than the top. The hand is coming forward, but the sword is coming back, and then there is a shot. And you'll notice, let me clear the screen here. You notice this is coming in the inside lane. So, oh wait, no, it's in the outside lane. My mistake. It's coming down the outside lane. And let's see. I can't tell if it connects or not. Hard to tell with video. I think Ender blocks that. So, what we're looking at video analysis now. We are looking at things that we are doing right, things we're doing wrong. And a lot of times you can watch a couple fights very slowly and then watch those fights at speed to look for those mistakes. Now, looking for specific mistakes sounds kind of negative. It is useful to look for things that are right too. But in my experience and the way I train, the things I'm doing right, I do want to know so I continue doing them. It also helps me check and see if I fix things. But having things that I've done wrong and an action plan to fix them is going to be a more useful tool for me personally. It is important when you're working with your fighters to be aware of how they react to criticism and how criticism should be couched, because some people need more positive critiques, right? You did this well, this is good, but, right? And in fact, that's a thing that is taught a lot of times when you're teaching courses, like I teach sometimes at Texas A&M, and when I ask someone a question and they give me an answer, I very rarely will say, no, that's wrong. I will try and find part of it that's right, and I will say, well, that's a good start, but what else can we do? Or how can we refine that answer? And that's the thing we may want to talk about when we are addressing people's movements. So for example, if I was talking with someone who wasn't myself, so we're talking about the hands being too low when I close. I would say the closing power is very good. You've got a good, strong, aggressive step. And that's an excellent place to start. A way we can improve that closing is to bring that hand up as you close to prevent you from getting stabbed in the center line, right? And to guard that center line. So phrasing our commentary as here's a positive thing and here's how to prove it, rather than here's the thing that's negative, you're a bad person for doing it wrong. So back to our video, got our fights. Looks like Ender did block that. And there's that stab I mentioned earlier, that I was going to get stabbed because my right hand was too low when it was guarding my center lane. Got hit in the side. Some more fights. All right. So that's a general view of how I review fights. But now, after fight 8's over here, let this fight finish going through. Okay. And note, these are all at 80% speed. If I turn them up to 100% speed, and we watch a fight again, you know, it's a little harder to keep track of what's going on, because everything is now just happening really quick. Right? Well, the stab's really obvious. When you get stabbed, it's really hard to not notice that someone just stabbed you. But the other fights, at a quick speed, a lot of things happening. Works better if you can turn, whoops, that's 1.2. Turn the speed down a little bit when you're doing fight review. So, with that said, now let's look at a little bit more systematic approach. Because I talked about how we can look at things, we get a little more experienced. Let's look at this from the idea of, I'm brand new, I haven't done fight review, I've got this video of myself fighting, what do I want to look for? How do I break it down? And we're going to skip ahead to fight 10 here. Not because type 10 is particularly good, but just because I like even numbers and it gives us a nice starting point. So here's fight 10. Going back to my style analysis, first thing I do is I'm going to watch a fight, and we're just going to watch 2 fights. We're going to watch fights 10 and 11, and we're going to work our way through the list. So this is what I would do if I was new to fight review and I wanted to go over my own fights. Right? Start at the beginning. Right? Stance. Right? Working from the ground up. How are my feet? Are my toes pointing in the right direction? Does my foot, when I step, do I step weird? You notice when Glenn's stepping in these videos, a lot of times the front foot is coming down, and it's not coming down a straight, toes going the direction that the step is moving, knees moving smoothly over the toes, stopping when the knee reaches a vertical line coming up from the toes. A lot of times you'll notice that Glenn's front leg, which is usually his right leg, the toes are canted a little bit to the left. And that's bad because it's a good way to roll your ankle and also strain your knee a little bit. So you should be stepping directly forward. Width of the feet, talked about that a little bit already. Does the stance get corrected when it moves, or does it get exaggerated in some bad way? Feet too close together, feet too far apart. Does that get worse as you move? And is the weight evenly centered in the feet? While we're talking about stance, how's their torso? Is standing up straight or are they hunching? A common mistake, and this actually showed up in some of my video from fighting Ender Sword and Board, is for at least our first couple fights, I was reaching over, right? I was bending at the shoulders, making my shoulders more exposed. Stand up straight. What is the shoulder squaring, right? What style you're fighting, it will depend whether your shoulders should be squared or not, but for what you're doing, should your shoulders be squared? What about your hips, right? How does your body position work? So let's take a look at this. We have got feet. We have frozen at kind of the beginning step. Let's turn this on a little bit, make sure we're actually in a fighting stance. Yep, this is the ready to fight. I'm going to back up just a couple frames here. All right, so this was we're about to fight. So let's take a look at that. Where is everything? So, style analysis sheet. Okay. Oops. A minute here. There we go. Style analysis, looking at our feet. Are the toes pointing in the right direction? Well, from the two different views, it actually does look like Glenn has gotten it right this time. Good work, Glenn. So this foot is now pointing, it looks like right about here. And that is about what I was looking for. I was looking to be lining up against his right hand. I didn't want to line up against the center line. I wanted to line up against his right-hand side. Looks like that foot's in a good place. The foot width, right? We've got a foot here and here looking at the bottom view. And that's about the right width, right? If my shoulders are this wide, right? Shoulders go maybe here and here. So that's about twice the shoulder width. Good stance. My feet are a little close together. They're a little linear, right? I'd rather if this foot was maybe over here, right? The back foot, my left foot. But stance. So critiqued my stance. Guard with the hands. I am in motion, so you can forgive people a little bit and forgive yourself. Well, be very generous with yourself. But in this case, with motion, what's happening? Well, my hands are really low, right? Ender's shoulders are up here. These are his shoulders. So if we draw a line from his shoulders to me, it should be something like that, right? I'm actually taller than Ender, so there's a little bit of angle to the camera. So maybe it's more like I should have my hands about this high, right, to get to Ender's shoulder. But you'll notice they're not. They are way down here, right? There is a gap on how high my hand should be, and it's really low. There is a hand in the center, right? Looking at the top, and then I've got a hand guarding the outside lane. That works out. Happy with that. So looked at some of the basics. Stance is pretty good. There's a little bend in the shoulder, but that may just be congenital bad posture, because if you look at me in the bottom, there is a pretty straight up and down torso line here. So I'm not really hunching at the shoulders. Okay. May just need to do more chest stretches to stretch out my chest here so my shoulders aren't rounded. So looked at my feet, looked at my torso, and then also talked about guard. So first question, is the guard just wrong? Yes. But what's wrong with it, right? Hands too low? Yes. Hands too high? Nope. Weapon angles, right? Pretty happy with that. We have got at the top, this sword is angled cross body to cut off the attacks to the left shoulder, which is the ones I'm most worried about, because I'm most concerned about his dominant hand, which is his right. So that is doing a good job of covering my center lane. I have got the other hand. This is my left hand. Sort of projected out, which is the guard that I'm using. So I'm happy with that. Elbows, right? Too bendy, too straight. That is another good thing to think about, right? In this case, you can see that the arm has a slight bend in it. That's good. Probably a little bit too straight, because it's going to be hard to throw a shot from there. From your default guard, you should be able to throw a shot without winding up, and you will notice several times that there is some wind up in my shots, right? Not always, but a lot more often than there should be. There's no shield, don't have to worry about that. So that lets me take a look at those things. I've looked at those things. Now I'm going to look at the video and see if those things continue to be a problem. So look at my feet. This time I'm just going to watch this fight looking at feet. So as I step, I notice looking at my feet that my feet become very linear, right? One foot directly in front of the other. That's great if I'm fencing on a strip, but I'm not doing fencing. I'm doing amp guard. And so that limits my ability to move laterally. And if I'm doing something like Belagarth or Dagger here, it makes me more like get knocked over when I get trucked from the side. There was a good guard or a good stance change. I want to talk about that real quick. Oops, back. There we go. Play. Step in, switch. All right. So that was pretty good. That one is, I'm like, that's not bad. So moving it slow. There's come in, feet, lose an arm. Transition stance. Now, in that transition to stance, this hand here, this arm, should have been up because the hand was low, which didn't give me any defense as I switched. But overall, not too bad with that stance change. Left foot forward stance is actually a little bit better. We've got more forward alignment with this foot. It's not perfect, but it's better. Feet are a little bit more in an L shape, so a little bit less linear with my feet as well. So when I switched to left leg forward, cleaned up my stance a little bit. Too bad I was already down an arm. So, oops. Let's continue on. We're going to watch fight. Happens. Simo. We'll do fight 12 too. We get a slightly different angle, so let's look at footwork again. Okay. There is a persistent problem with the legs, the wrong foot moving, right? If we go back and we watch the beginning of this fight, if you look at the top, whoops, there we go, top screen, right? When I step to my left, there's, let's see, maybe I misremembered that. Should be a step to the left here that is led by the right foot instead of the left foot. Nope, I guess not. All right, I hallucinated that part. That was actually a pretty good example of if you're moving to the left, lead with your left foot. All right, so good footwork, Len. Good work. All right, let's go back. And now, since we've watched those fights, we've looked at our feet. So now we're going to do the same fights, and we're going to look at shots. Right? A lot of times for shots, you're going to want to look at more than just a few fights, because 2 fights in a row may not necessarily give you a lot of shot variety. One thing you can do that will help you with checking shots is when you watch a series of fights, just watch them through and just make a little tally. Have a little sheet of paper, right? Left hand, right hand for Florentine, right? If you're doing something else, maybe it's sword and board, maybe it's you've got stab, high cross, a couple different shots, right? And just make tally marks for every time the killing blow or blow that inflicts an injury is that hand or that shot. And that can help you identify if you have any shot variety. Right? A lot of times you can just see it. Oh, every single fight, it's just a high cross. Well, then you'd be like, okay, there's lack of shot variety. But sometimes getting those statistics can be extremely handy, especially in Florentine, because it can give you an exact sense of how often am I using one hand to do something. A lot of time in Florentine, it means all of my shots come from my dominant hand. Not always, but a thing to think about. Right? So we're going to watch a couple fights here, and we're just going to look at the shots. We're going to talk about which hand is which, or which hand does what. So in this fight, fight number 10 here, it begins. Fake with the right. Another fake with the right. Fake with the right, then got stabbed. Fake with the right. So one of the things to note there, right? We haven't really talked about that sort of thing to look at. But doing the same thing over and over again is a good way to get killed. I faked 3 times, and Ender very correctly and very cleverly was like, well, if he's done it twice, he does it again, I'm stabbing him. Because every time I faked inside to outside, right? It wasn't a big movement, but it was enough movement. He's like, ooh, if his hand's moving to the outside, I'm going to stab him in the center lane. And that's exactly what happened there in fight 10. All right. Attempted a shot with the right hand, lost the arm. Threw an attack with the left, silent mode. Shot with the right, shot with the left. Ender's now armed. This should be a slightly different scenario for Glenn, because now he's fighting a single sword, and you want to treat that a little differently because there's only one weapon to fight. That was a block with the right and an attack with the left. So, from the 3 fights we've looked at, there's actually more attacks coming from the right than the left, or more movement, I should say, coming from the right with the left. But there are shots coming from both sides. Look at fight 13 here. That was a left-hand stab. So, attack from the left. Not a feint, but an actual committed attack. Stab from the right hand. Right? So, one thing we can say is that Glenn's throwing a good variety of shots, right? Stabs, there was one from the left and one from the right. Because a common thing people do is maybe they throw with both hands, but sometimes the more complex shots, the ones that require a little more finesse, like sometimes a stab, only comes from one hand. So Glenn's doing a good job using both hands. Right? Attacking all quadrants. Most of these shots are high. Haven't seen any real leg shots thrown. In fact, there aren't really leg shots thrown in this video. That is potentially a flaw of the fighting style. It's also a flaw in Glenn, because Glenn is tall and Glenn is very inflexible, so it's actually hard for me to stretch enough to get down to lower shots without bending at the waist, which is a terrible idea. But it's certainly a room for improvement area, right? Because that's one of our things in our checklist. Have they thrown a leg shot? No. Maybe work on that, Glenn. Too many shots to the outside lane. Looks like a pretty good mix of shots there. So, looking through some shots. And with these, notice I have to run through them at a low speed. Well, I'm learning at 8%, but I have to stop and go frame by frame or anything like that. I was able to go through and just count hands, which hand is throwing which shot. Power generation, a little bit harder to do in video because it's hard to see exactly how they're moving, but can be a useful thing to do. Quality, are there shots doing sufficient force? That's something that a little harder to tell from video. Setting up for shots, we did notice a bunch of setups. In fact, if we go back to fight 10 here, oops, didn't go back far enough. Fight 10. So, set up with the right, trying to draw something with something across that body. Set up with the right, stabbed. So we are doing setups, but the setups often are coming from the right. I'm setting up the right to do something with the left, and that has become a consistent pattern, both in that fight and actually in some other fights. So it is something we want to look at, resetting up patterns. Defense, talked about that already to some degree. As far as blocking, there's not a lot of cross-body blocking going on. In fact, let's watch some more fights here. We'll just pick up here with 10. Let's look at how Glenn's defense is doing. Right. So, we've already talked about hands are low. That was definitely a reach. Should have got you punished, which it did. Here we go. Let's see. Defense. Good stab defense there. Did clear that out. In fact, let's go back and look at that stab defense. Right. Going through, whoops, too far. So, Glenn goes to close, sees the stab coming, a little slow on the read of the stab. Good stab from Ender. Now we're going to critique that, but he's doing this so well, let's talk about it. He's got his palm up, palm down. He's got good extension. He's leaning a little bit, but not too far. Could have taken a little bit of a knee bend in there to get a little more range, but overall, really good stab. And now we can see that Glenn is starting to brush it out. If you look at the bottom, you can see the left hand coming over. There is, whoops, these two levels are out of frame because if you look at the top frame, the sword's already made contact. The bottom, we've not reached that point yet. So yeah, these two video streams are out of sync at this point. But we can see at the top how it is now pushing the blade aside. There we go, pushing the stab aside and clearing the weapon out. Overly blocked, because that tip should not be coming out as far as it is. When we look at this block, this hand should have stayed here, and instead it is over here. There's all this extra movement of the tip, right? Tips move this far. That's a mistake. Definitely don't want to be doing that. But a good block on the stab. Oops, and then a riposte with the left hand. Swords make contact. Glenn powers through and lands a shot. So, so blocks, right? The key part of that was the block on the stab. Cleared it out, overblocked. So things we're looking at. So now let's watch a few more fights. Let it go back to speed. Should be a block as Glenn closes. Ender only has one sword. Glenn should be able to block his sword, control it, and then throw a shot. Let's watch that again here. The bottom view may be better for this. Yes, we can see Glenn blocks with the right hand, keeps his center line closed, encourages Ender to go to the outside, blocks, and then swings with the other hand. So, stab wasn't bad, but you'll notice when this stab happens that where is the other hand? Right? So we've got this, we got the fake with the right, and then we have a stab from the left, good forward lunge, middle looking hands, and notice that right hand is not guarding anything. This hand is now doing nothing. It has moved out in this direction, and nothing is happening over here. There is nothing that is coming in as a threat. If you look at the top, it may look like the sword in Ender's left hand is going to threaten Glenn, but if you look at it from the bottom, you can see that no, he's actually tried to close off the center lane because he's just realized he's about to get stabbed in the center lane and doesn't have a block there. So, that right hand for Glenn is not doing any good, right? That should have been protecting his arm, because you notice what is happening now is that this sword is coming down on Glenn's arm, because this sword should be laying across here and intercepting it, but it's not. So we can see that, oops, let me go back to the cursor. You can see that that is, well, Ender pulled the shot because he got stabbed. But Ender certainly could have hit the arm and maybe even the body on that stab. So all right, one more fight to look at blocking. Again, let's go back, and we can see that again we don't have that block. Right? Come in, set up, and then going through this frame by frame, that left hand, right? We can see this left hand here. There it is. And if you look at the bottom, you can see it's way up here, right? It is going to move in a way that is not helpful to our defense, right? Look at that. It's moving to the outside lane. It has now moved to a point where it's not doing anything to protect Glenn. The only reason Glenn doesn't get hit is Ender's just a little bit short in his reach, and then Glenn comes forward with a stab. Good follow through on the stab. Notice how the palm, if we clear this, and what we're looking for is going to be right in this area here, right? But if we go back a couple frames, you can see it goes from a palm to the side, hand rotates to a palm down, good stab, makes good contact, and stab was good. This hand over here on the left, like look where that hand is located now, not in front of the body. So definitely a thing to look at, blocking, right? So we see some examples of bad fighting, but we also can now, another thing we're looking at. So we're just going through the video, picking feature after feature after feature. So, oops, where's my cursor? So, final things to talk about, or two final things to talk about, movement and fight control. So, range control and how they're moving. This fight in particular, you'll notice if we go back a step, here's Glenn lunging, great work. Decided to commit a little bit further to lunge, and notice what happens to Glenn's torso, right? Glenn's shoulder line is currently here, right? Because he's got a bend in the knee, and then as movement continues, Glenn comes up. Look where Glenn's shoulder line is now. Now it's way up here. Oops, that was not what I wanted to do. Shoulder line. Shoulder line. Now it's up here because Glenn has screwed up his footwork and is now moving up because his feet have come together down here on the bottom. His leg has straightened. He has overstepped and has become unable to control his momentum. Movement is definitely getting a little sloppy. Glenn needs to do some movement drills because he is not correctly anticipating and controlling his momentum. Right? He should have been able to stop, or if he was going to continue to stab, he should be able to do something a little more graceful than this. Right? We've got this bend at the waist. We've got the straight leg. It's just it's wrong in several ways, I guess is what we could say there. And that really should have been handled by finishing that with a stutter step at the end or a cross step. And instead, we have got what happens here, right? Which is this kind of weird hop and transition. So things to be aware of. As far as fight control, let's see what happens. Who is initiating? Who's controlling what's happening with range? Right? Glenn initiated. Glenn moved forward. That's actually been a trend in a lot of our fights. Glenn is being very aggressive and is trying to control the fight by drawing attacks as he steps in. Right? And that is certainly one way to fight, and it's nothing wrong with that. But it's the only thing Glenn's doing. Glenn is very rarely, in fact, I don't think there's any fights in this sequence, where Glenn baits Ender into closing. Right? Sometimes Ender does close, but that's when Ender sees the initiative. Right? Glenn is not controlling the fight by getting Ender to move in and giving up ground to get to a range that works for him and deals with what he wants to do. Which, on one hand, that's the thing that's being practiced because fighting from a more open range is something Glenn is better at. So this is a weaker thing that Glenn is practicing, so good for him, working on closing and controlling. But it's the only thing we see in the sequence, so it's another thing we want to be aware of. Baits, right? Baits and openers. What's happening as far as controlling the fight? A lot of it is showing a shot to the out, or showing an opening to the outside, closing the center lane, specifically with the right hand, and closing. Okay? So watch what happens with Glenn's right hand in these next couple fights, right? Especially when he starts to move in. Oh, well, that time he just got stabbed in the right arm, so he didn't do anything with his right arm. He got stabbed in it. So in this next fight, again, watching that right hand, Glenn threw a shot really from outside range with that opener. In this last round, let's watch that again here. Right hand, throw a shot from outside range. That was more of a go-away shot than anything. But here's particularly, right, that right hand had a little bit, there was a quick, cock, look at my right hand, throw with the left. And that is a persistent thing we see as far as Glenn's openers. Something with the right hand to draw attention to it, and then an attack with the left. That's not wrong. That's a good opener. Right hand openers are great openers because people are used to focusing on your right hand. It's a hand they're more threatened with. And as someone who's actually left-handed, getting them to look at your right while you hit them with your better hand can be a good strategy. The problem is very consistently the same thing. Right? Not a lot of variety. Glenn needs to find more openers, more consistent openers. So we don't see a lot of what happens when Glenn gets pressed because he's doing a lot of the aggressing. There are some fights where Ender closes and Glenn has to give ground, and a lot of times then he just gives ground and opens range. I just said that, and now we have a fight where that didn't happen, so let's back up to this one. This one, Ender does advance, and what Glenn's looking to do is block and riposte. So Ender closes. Right? He closes with a shot with his right hand to Glenn's defense. Glenn blocks it, and this is a thing that, as a lefty particularly, lefties in general are used to block with their left hand because sword and board, you're blocking your sword side with your sword, and then Florentine, you now have the same habit. So he blocks the shot, which is really just a feeling out shot. Notice it's not threatening Glenn's arm at all, right? If we move the shot forward, you'll see that it hits basically the right above Glenn's hand. And it's not really far enough to do more than maybe hit him in the wrist. So this is much more an opener to get Glenn's attention in that area, to potentially get him to float his guard out. It's a little testing shot. So as we continue, you can see that this is what Ender uses to also disguise his forward movement. So there's a shot, there's a step there. You'll notice his feet are gathering together as he steps, because now you can see his right foot is coming forward. Glenn's guard is actually opening up, so good work on drawing that, because that pulled the left hand into a slightly open position, create a slightly bigger gap between his weapons. And now the big step. And this is where Glenn should be bringing that elbow in. Right here, this elbow should be sucking into his side so he can turn his hand out to jam this shot, right? Maybe not block out, but he definitely wants to come forward to interrupt this shot as it comes in. So let's see what happens here. Hand comes up. Glenn bid on that. I think his hand's going to be too high now. And Glenn is bringing a cross hand block. Kind of a bad choice in my opinion. Big mistake, Glenn. But does work, and Glenn has unfortunately picked this habit up from doing SCA fighting. Of cross blocking, because it gives you a nice strong block. It's well structured. So he brings the hand across. I don't know if he got the block. I couldn't tell you because I don't remember this particular fight. But it does look like it hit his sword, because you can see how the sword gets knocked down. In other words, the tip moves down and the handle moves up, which probably means there's a contact there that is hitting the handle just below Glenn's hand and is driving the sword into that movement. Boop, and then Glenn riposte. Yeah, all right, so we take the cross block. So that is looking at fight control and looking at some of the movements. So that's generally what there is to looking at fight tape, right? You look for specific things, and then you watch the video, and then you rewind the video, and you look for more specific things. Okay? As you get more experienced at it, you can just watch the video and just look for things you think are wrong, but it can definitely help to also go through a list. I still go back and go through my list so that I can make sure I haven't forgotten to look for something, right? Because especially this one, when I first looked through this, what I noticed so much was my hands being low and my feet being out of alignment, that the first time I watched the video, that's what I mostly saw, right? It wasn't until I started looking through, specifically looking at fight control, that I noticed most of my openers are a right hand feint and an attack, or a left hand feinting attack, right? There is, I don't think, any that I recall, where there's a left hand opener and a right hand attack, right? That's a flaw. That's a thing that's missing. So what are you doing, and are you doing other things? What else could you be doing? So that is, in a nutshell, my fight review. So, actually maybe a long nutshell since it's 9 o'clock. So, questions. Are there any questions people have, fights they want to look at, or comments they want to make about any particular fights they saw in here? So I'll open it up to the floor. Ink's typing. And you guys are also welcome to unmute, assuming the channel will let you, and just, voice your comments as well. All right. Ink asks, I noticed on this list there's a category called tracing. Is that just watching the weapon? So tracing is a term for a particular fighting style, and tracing just means that whatever move you do, they move, or they do, right? So kind of like, instead of drawing an original piece of art, you just trace someone else's, right? Think of a person, and we've probably all had this experience. You're fighting somebody, and maybe you're both fighting sword and board, right? And you step in to throw a shot, and as soon as you start throwing a shot, they throw a shot, right? But they won't throw a shot until you do. But as soon as you start throwing, they throw, right? And this ends up a lot of time with you guys simoing, maybe exchanging arms, maybe you arm them and they kill you, or vice versa. But whenever you throw a shot, you don't expect them to block. You expect them to also swing. So that's tracing, right? Basically, as soon as you attack, they attack, and they don't attack until you do. And that is a fighting style that can be somewhat effective. It's definitely a dead-end fighting style, because as soon as someone knows you're tracing, they can deal with it. But if you don't realize someone's tracing, you have this problem where, like, every time I fight this guy, I always end up getting hit. How is he always being able to hit me? And the answer is he's waiting until you're attacking, and then instead of worrying about defense, he attacks into your attack. So the best way to deal with tracers is to have a feint, because they aren't queuing off your whole attack. They're queuing off the tail of your attack. As soon as they see an attack coming, they're attacking. And it's usually not a conscious decision because it's happening very quickly. They have trained themselves that when your arm comes forward, they attack. Right? So if you can feint a shot, they will then make the attack. And so you feint, and then you transition from your feint into a block of the attack that they will immediately initiate, and then you block their attack, and then you counter while they are recovering from their attack. That's how you do a tracing, and that's what tracing is. Good question. Other questions? All right. All right, Nanashi is typing a question, so we got another question coming in here. All right, so the question is, under shots variety, too many shots to the outside lane, yes is the favorite answer. Let me check my style analysis sheet. Shots. Too many shots to the outside lane. Yes and no. So yeah, you have found a typo in my checklist. You should not be throwing too many shots to the outside lane. And that's actually a really common mistake people make, is they throw a lot of shots to the outside lane. A lot of times because that's what's available. Sometimes to get to the inside lane, you have to fake and get control of it. So you should not throw a lot of shots to the outside lane. Good catch. I will update my sheet. Thanks, Nanashi. All right. Other questions? All right, looks like no one else is typing in any questions. So we will wrap it up there. If you have questions about fighting in general, you're always welcome to hit me up on Discord or on Facebook, because I like talking about fighting. I may do this again sometime soon, and instead of reviewing my own fighting, because that only helps really me, then I can take video from other people and review theirs. Kind of like, maybe exactly like, what Kiara and Fikes and I don't remember who else was in there. But there were some of the other warlords in Amtgard were doing a review session for some non-binary and female fighters a couple weeks ago, which is actually what inspired me to do this. I was like, I want a review video. And so here we are reviewing my video. And also want to give people a little advice on how to review their own video. So with that said, I will probably figure out a time to do some fight review of other people's video and solicit some video from people. But for now, thank you all for coming, and have a good weekend.